throne chamber of the Vornak war barge was built to overwhelm the senses. Every surface was a statement of dominance, towering columns carved from the bones of conquered leviathans, war banners stitched with the skins of defeated generals, and the metallic tang of blood that still lingered from executions carried out not an hour before. Overlord Rakshar sat at the center of it all, his throne forged from the black hole plating of a worldbreaker ship, each armrest capped with the claws of enemies who had dared to resist. He had presided over countless such meetings, each one ending with submission or annihilation. The galaxy had taught him that every species eventually bowed when shown the teeth of the Vornak, and yet one race had remained an enigma: humans. They had expanded into trade routes without petition, sent envoys without tribute, and somehow avoided becoming another trophy in his hall. Rakshar had long wondered why. The chamber doors opened with a hydraulic sigh, and the human delegation stepped into the haze of incense and dominance pheromones. At the front walked Envoy Commander Lyra Hale, slender, straight-backed, dressed in a plain diplomatic uniform, devoid of armor or decoration. She was an odd sight amid the ostentation of his court. No ceremonial guard flanked her, no visible weapons hung at her side. Her face was calm, the kind of calm that made Rakshar think of still water before the strike of a hidden predator, though he dismissed the thought as absurd. Humans were prey animals, fragile in body, unremarkable in stature. Her steps did not falter under the weight of the stares fixed upon her, and her eyes, they were steady, locked on his with a focus that made him feel, for the briefest heartbeat, that she was not looking at him, but into him. He rose, letting the light catch the serrated edges of his jaw. The murmurs around the chamber softened as every Vornak present waited for the ritual display. Slowly, deliberately, Rakshar bared his fangs, each one filed to a killing edge, polished until they gleamed like wet obsidian. It was not just a show of anatomy, it was the ancient gesture of his kind, a universal signal of imminent violence, a promise that what stood before him was already claimed in his mind as a kill. Entire worlds had surrendered under the weight of that sight. She did not flinch. She did not step back. Instead, Lyra tilted her head ever so slightly, as if examining a curiosity in a museum, rather than a warlord capable of erasing her species from the stars. Then, with a voice that was quiet enough to force every listener to lean forward, she asked, "Is that supposed to scare me?" The words rippled through the chamber like a fault line splitting stone. Every alien present warriors hardened in the crucible of the blood proving. Diplomats who had watched empires fall stared in disbelief. Somewhere in the shadows, a younger Vornak hissed a curse. Rakshar's claws flexed against the arms of his throne, not out of rage, but because in that moment, for the first time in years, he felt something dangerously close to uncertainty. Lyra didn't so much as acknowledge the stir her words had caused. Her expression remained level, her voice even, as if she were here for nothing more than a polite exchange between equals. She spoke of trade corridors, of tariffs adjusted for mutual advantage, of shared navigational data that would make both fleets richer. It was the same tone one might use when discussing weather patterns or the merits of different wines, utterly detached from the silent challenge still hanging in the air. Rakshar's councils shifted in their seats, their bodies betraying agitation that their leader's intimidation had been met with such indifference. They were an intimidating collection in their own right. The serpentine matriarch Saval, her elongated neck coiled loosely, golden eyes blinking in a slow predatory rhythm. Lord Crick of the Ashwings, his feathered crest bristling every time a human syllable struck his ears. The insectoid strategist Verkeer, mandibles clicking as he watched, antennae sweeping to taste the emotional tension. Each came from a predator culture. Each had carved their rank from the hides of the defeated. They had gathered expecting to witness the easy folding of another soft-blooded envoy, not the calm persistence of a woman who treated the room as if it belonged to her. At Lyra's right hand, Dr. Maravos wrote notes on a pad of cream-colored paper, the ink glistening as it dried. The scratching of her pen was an alien sound here, almost offensive in its quaintness. Several Vornak glanced at one another in disbelief. To them, data was stored in encrypted holocores and guarded like treasure. Why commit anything to something so vulnerable? Why use a tool so primitive when the air was thick with scanning tech? The absurdity of it only deepened their conviction that humans were behind the curve. The first interruption came like a strike. Warlord Grath, his shoulders hunched forward under armor made from the plated hides of swamp leviathans, barked a laugh that rattled the banners overhead. "Carrion feeders," he said, his voice a guttural scrape. "That's what you are. Fragile stock scavenging the leavings of greater hunters. You think to speak of trade as though you bring something of value to the clans?" Lyra turned her gaze toward him, not sharply, but with the slow precision of someone choosing exactly where to aim their attention. "It's better to be underestimated," she said, her voice neither defensive nor mocking, simply offering the words as fact. The simplicity of it hung in the air, strange and unanswerable. Rakshar, curious now, leaned forward, his claws extended, and he brought them down hard against the table's edge. The impact left deep grooves in the stone, the sound a sharp crack that cut through every whisper in the chamber. The vibration shuddered through the floor. Lyra did not blink. Her hands stayed folded neatly before her. Her eyes didn't so much as flicker to the scars his claws had left. It was the youngest of the council, still flush from recent victories, who made the next attempt. His scales gleamed fresh, unscarred, his arrogance untempered by failure. "Your kind speaks often of its wars," he said, the words weighted with disdain. "But we have heard the truth. Market disputes, border squabbles, not war as predators wage it, not war worth remembering." His smirk was as sharp as the blade on his hip. Lyra's lips curved, but it was not a smile meant to reassure. It was a narrow, humorless thing that showed nothing of her teeth yet conveyed the promise of something far sharper. "Would you like a demonstration?" she asked softly. The question was not an offer. It was a ripple through the air, a disturbance that made even the most seasoned predators in the chamber glance toward Rakshar to see how he would answer. Rakshar let the silence stretch, savoring the tension he could almost taste in the air. Then, with the ease of a predator moving in for the final strike, he rose from his throne and let his voice carry across the chamber. "Words are wind," he said, drawing the phrase out like a blade. "The Vornak settle matters with the blood proving. One of yours, one of ours. The outcome decides the measure of your kind's honor." The reaction was immediate, a low murmur rippling through the assembled clans, some eager for spectacle, others already imagining the swift and bloody end of a human envoy. What Rakshar did not expect was how quickly the human replied. "Agreed," Lyra said without hesitation, the syllables crisp and clear, leaving no room for interpretation. There was no glance toward her team for counsel, no whispered strategy, only a certainty that cut through the noise. For the first time, a sliver of confusion threaded through the Overlord's thoughts. He had seen many delegates bluff, but this did not sound like one. She turned, scanning the small cluster of humans at her back, and her gaze settled on a man who had been half in shadow until now. Sergeant Cade Rowan stepped forward, moving with the unhurried ease of someone fetching a tool from a shelf, rather than walking into a fight for his species' reputation. He wore no armor, no reinforced boots, nothing but a dark, unmarked jacket and trousers that had clearly seen travel. There was no weapon at his side, no ceremonial blade, not even the smallest visible sign of preparation. The Vornak bioscanner operators went to work immediately, translucent readouts appearing in the air before their eyes. They exchanged looks and the faint huffing sound their species made when something was beneath notice. "Low muscle density," one muttered. "Average reflex range, minimal adrenal response." Another clicked her mandibles. "Unfit for real combat." By contrast, the warrior selected to face him was Droon Kor, a name that needed no introduction in Vornak space. Champion of 3 blood seasons, his victories measured not in wins, but in how few opponents had survived long enough to see the medics. His frame was a fortress of chitin and muscle, scars marking where other predators had failed to fell him. He wielded a chain axe that, in the hands of a lesser being, would have been an unmanageable slab of steel. In Droon Kor's grasp, it was an extension of his will. Lyra's eyes didn't leave her chosen fighter. "Don't make it quick, Sergeant," she said, her voice carrying the casual authority of someone ordering tea instead of bloodshed. Teach them something they'll remember. The words were not for Drun Kor, nor for Rakshar's benefit, but for the entire council, a promise that whatever happened next would not be forgotten. The blood-proving arena was a relic of an older galaxy, where honor was measured not by words or treaties, but by the spectacle of violence. Its foundation was hewn from stone, quarried on a world long dead, each slab carved with the names of champions whose victories had rewritten the destinies of clans. Above it arched a canopy of modern shield generators, their hum barely audible over the ambient roar of the crowd. The walls bore scars from centuries of contest gouges where weapons had struck, scorch marks from energy bursts, and here and there the faint stain of blood that no amount of cleansing could quite erase. Every seat was filled. Vornak warriors lined the front rows, their bodies leaning forward with predatory eagerness. Interspersed were delegates from allied species, a reptilian envoy with mirrored scales, who hissed in rhythm with the crowd's chants, a heavy-bodied avian whose crest flared with each new wager called out, and an insectoid trader clicking rapid bets into the air through a holographic display. The cacophony was a living thing. Battle cries from throats evolved to startle prey. The clatter of weapons against armored chests, the dull thunder of boots stamping in unison. Drun Kor made his entrance like a siege engine rolling into place. He stepped onto the arena floor, each movement deliberate, the heavy chitin plating on his shoulders and chest shifting with a sound like grinding stone. His chain axe rested casually in his grip, but its weight was enough to make the sand beneath his feet sink. The crowd's roar swelled as he turned in a slow circle, showing himself to every section, letting them drink in the sight of the champion they'd come to see kill a human. When Cade Rowan emerged from the opposite gate, there was no fanfare, no banners, no pounding drums. He walked as if the arena were just another hallway, his steps unhurried. His hands rested loose at his sides until he reached the center, where he paused to roll his shoulders, tilt his head side to side, and begin a slow, methodical set of stretches. Hamstrings, quads, arms, back, every movement unhurried, as though oblivious to the thousands of eyes fixed on him. It was so at odds with the fevered anticipation in the stands that it drew a ripple of confusion, then laughter. The opening signal came in the form of a low tone that vibrated through the shielded air, and Drun Kor wasted no time. He closed the distance in 3 massive strides, the chain axe rising high over his head, then crashing down with the force of a falling meteor. The blow was designed to end the match before it began, to leave nothing but red pulp where the human skull had been. But when the weapon struck, it hit only sand. Cade had stepped aside with no more urgency than someone sidestepping a puddle, the arc of the axe passing so close he could have brushed it with his sleeve. The crowd reacted with surprise, but Drun didn't pause. He swung again, this time low and horizontal, aiming to take the human off his feet. Cade's hands moved not to block, not to grab the blade, but to meet the haft near the midpoint. A subtle redirection, a twist of his body, and the great champion found himself over-rotating, his momentum pulling him one step too far. It was nothing, a mistake measured in inches. But in an arena like this, every inch mattered. On the third approach, Drun aimed for precision, a feint high, then a sudden jab with the blunt end toward the ribs meant to stun. Cade's counter was almost invisible, a flicker of movement as his fingers brushed the armored joint at Drun's elbow. The effect was immediate. The warrior's forearm twitched, his grip faltered for the briefest moment, and his swing went wide. A murmur ran through the stands. This was not how blood-proving bouts unfolded. Prey did not sidestep. Prey did not redirect. And Prey certainly did not make champions' limbs go slack with a single touch. Drun snarled, the sound a rolling growl that reverberated through the arena's bones. He pressed forward, swinging in tighter arcs, putting more of his weight behind each blow. Cade gave ground only when it suited him, every retreat angled to force Drun into turning, burning energy with each pivot. He never struck back, never committed to a decisive attack. His role was that of shadow, always where the champion wasn't. his movements flowing around the chain axe as though it were no more dangerous than a branch swaying in wind. By the time the round's end signal sounded a sharp chime that cut cleanly through the din, Droon's breathing had deepened, his chest rising and falling in visible heaves. Sweat slicked the gaps in his kitten, and his weapon no longer moved with the effortless precision of the opening charge. Across from him, Cade stood in the same loose posture he had begun with, unmarked, unhurried, eyes steady as if he'd merely been warming up. The contrast was so stark it drew a momentary hush from the crowd, a silence filled with the realization that this fight was not following the script they had expected. The second round began without ceremony, the crowd already leaning forward in anticipation of a shift. Drooncore emerged from his corner differently this time, the reckless, sweeping arcs of the first exchange replaced with measured bursts of movement. He was no longer charging headlong, he was cutting angles, trying to pen the human in against the arena's wall where the shield would prevent escape. His chain axe moved in smaller, sharper strokes, each one calculated to herd rather than simply destroy. Cade adjusted as though it were the most natural thing in the world. His feet traced a lazy circle around the champion, each step drawing Droon into another pivot, another turn. He gave space when it served him, then closed it unexpectedly, forcing Droon to commit to a swing just a fraction too early. In the observation box above, Dr. Amara Voss leaned toward a young human aide, her voice calm, almost academic. "He's controlling the center of gravity," she murmured. "Every step Droon takes is heavy. Every turn costs him energy. Watch his shoulders, they're starting to rise. That means his breath is going shallow." Two Vornak nearby turned their heads sharply at her words, antennae twitching, as though they couldn't quite decide if this was insight or insult. The idea that a human could break down their champion's movements like a piece of machinery was not just unexpected, it was vaguely obscene. On the sand, Cade shifted gears. A sidestep became a sudden press inside Droon's guard, his hands snapping to the champion's shoulder. A twist, a drop of his own weight, and the much larger warrior staggered forward, momentarily off balance. Cade didn't follow with a killing blow. Instead, he let the moment pass, stepping away as if giving Droon a chance to reset. The restraint was intentional, and it didn't go unnoticed. Droon's next approach came with a roar that rattled the arena's shields. He surged forward, chain axe slicing through the air in a brutal upward arc. But Cade was already inside the swing before it could build its killing momentum. One arm slipped under Droon's, the other clamped down on a precise spot just beneath the armored ridge of his neck. The effect was immediate. Droon's legs trembled, his massive frame dropping to one knee as though his body had simply decided to stop listening to him. The gasp from the crowd was almost physical. In Vornak culture, for a predator to kneel before prey was a visual so jarring it felt like sacrilege. Even Rakshar's claws tightened on the arms of his throne, the slow scrape of keratin on metal lost beneath the sudden surge of voices in the stands. Cade released the hold without ceremony, stepping back to allow Droon to rise. The gesture was not mercy. It was a statement. The fight was his to end at any moment, and he was choosing not to. It was the kind of humiliation that cut deeper than any blade. Droon's eyes burned with fury, his jaw flexing as he forced himself upright. He attacked again, and again Cade dismantled him. The first time with a simple leg sweep that took advantage of Droon's overcommitment, sending the champion sprawling into the sand. The second time with a sharp twist of the arm that forced Droon to drop his weapon entirely before shoving it back into his grasp like a teacher returning a misplaced tool. Each exchange was shorter, the gaps between attacks stretching longer as Droon's chest heaved for air. By the time the third attempt came, it was clear to everyone, even the most fervent believers in the blood-proving sanctity, that the champion's strength was bleeding away with every breath. His movements slowed, his swings grew ragged, and when he finally lunged, it was without the precision that had carried him through 3 seasons undefeated. Cade didn't even have to counter. He simply sidestepped, letting Droon's own weight pull him forward until his knees hit the sand. This time he didn't get up. His shoulders rose and fell in great, shuddering breaths, his arms trembling with the effort of even holding himself upright. The chain axe lay discarded beside him, half buried in the grit. Cade stood a few paces away, untouched, breathing steady, his posture relaxed as though the entire encounter had been little more than an extended drill. The crowd was silent now, the reality of what they had witnessed settling over them like a closing vice. Their predator had been taken apart, piece by piece, by something they had believed was prey. The council chamber felt different when they returned. The war banners still hung, the air still carried the tang of metal and blood, but something subtle had shifted. Perhaps it was the way the Vornak guards avoided meeting the humans' eyes, or the heavy quiet that followed the sound of their boots on the polished stone floor. Lyra moved to the center of the table, as if she'd never left, resting her hands lightly on the surface before looking up at Rakshar. "Thank you," she said, her tone warm, almost gracious, "for hosting such an educational demonstration." Before the Overlord could respond, she tapped a small device on her wrist. The air above the table shimmered, and a hollow display bloomed to life. Detailed schematics of Vornak war barges rotated in perfect resolution, each labeled with crew capacities, shield harmonics, and weapon cycles. With a gesture, the image shifted to sprawling maps of supply chain routes, fuel depots, and refit stations. Another flick, and the display zeroed in on command nodes, each tagged with its exact planetary coordinates and encryption frequencies. The room seemed to draw a collective breath. Dr. Amara Voss didn't bother looking up from her paper notes as she spoke, her voice calm and clinical. "We've been mapping your military infrastructure for 2 years," she said. "Operating under trade cover gave us access to ports, warehouses, and your lower-tier communication hubs. We can collapse your fleet's comms in 9 minutes." She let a number hang there, sharp as a blade. 10 if we're feeling generous." Rakshar's eyes narrowed, the edges of his jaw flexing. "How?" The word was not a challenge, but the kind of demand issued by someone already bracing for an answer they will not like. Lyra met his gaze without the faintest hesitation. "By being underestimated." The hollow shifted again, and the chamber became a theater of memory. Images of human freighters docking at Vornak stations, their crews exchanging polite nods with harbor officials. Crates unloaded and delivered to market stalls, innocuous goods hiding microbeacons no bigger than a grain of rice. Traders laughing in cantinas, seemingly drunk, while their comms quietly captured security chatter from nearby officers. Maintenance contracts awarded to human engineers, who spent long hours repairing hangar systems while recording patrol schedules and fleet rotation data. A handshake here, a gift of exotic liquor there, each a seed planted in the soil of complacency. The scene shifted faster, a Vornak quartermaster unknowingly passing encrypted manifest to a human merchant. A small, unremarkable shuttle departing a refit yard moments after new defense protocols were uploaded. An apprentice scribe receiving an off-world pen that, when disassembled, contained a complete relay map of the sector's communications grid. When the images faded, silence swallowed the chamber. Every Vornak present now understood that the fight in the arena had never been the point. The real battle had been happening in their blind spot for years, and they had not only missed it, they had made it possible. Rakshar sat very still, the weight of that realization settling over him, and for the first time since Lyra Hale had stepped into his hall, he understood exactly who had been hunting whom. Lyra let the hollow display fade until only the polished surface of the council table remained between them. Her tone was conversational, almost gentle, as if the last 20 minutes hadn't dismantled the Vornak's sense of military supremacy. "Our proposal is straightforward," she said. "A mutual defense pact, formal recognition of human-controlled sectors, a fair exchange of technology and research." She didn't lean forward or raise her voice. The calm delivery made the terms sound less like demands and more like inevitabilities. Rakshar's gaze shifted from her to the officers along the sides of the chamber. Some stared at the table as if its grain had suddenly become fascinating. Others glanced at him only to look quickly away. The unspoken message was unanimous. To defy these humans now would not be an act of courage, but of suicide. Even Drunkor's second-in-command, a warrior who had never shown hesitation in his life, kept his eyes down, his posture speaking of something dangerously close to respect. Across the table, Sergeant Cade Rowan leaned in slightly, the faintest grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "If you ever want a rematch," he said, his voice casual but carrying just enough to reach every ear in the room, "bring two of your best. I'll still keep it educational." The line landed like a quiet strike, neither boast nor threat, but a reminder that today's outcome hadn't come close to testing him. Rakshar held Lyra's gaze for a long moment, searching for any sign of bluff. There was none. Finally, he inclined his head, the smallest concession in his culture, but one every Vornak present understood. "Your terms," he said slowly, "are accepted." And the words carried no theatrics, no pretense of bargaining, only the weight of a predator acknowledging another apex in the same hunting ground. The humans departed without haste, their footsteps fading down the grand corridor, punctuated by soft laughter about where to eat before their next meeting. The sound carried an ease that grated against the silence they left behind, a reminder that they were walking away unshaken, unscarred, and entirely in control. Rakshar remained in his throne, the chamber now cavernous in its stillness. He found his thoughts circling back to that first moment, the deliberate baring of his fangs, the gesture that had bent countless enemies to his will. How she had met it not with fear, but with a tilted head and a question that cut deeper than any weapon. Now he understood. The real predators had never been the ones baring their teeth. They had been the ones smiling. His claws tightened against the armrests as the truth settled over him, heavy and cold. "We feared nothing before today. Now we fear the humans.